Carver Historical Commission invites you to join us in another interview with a lifelong Carver citizen. I'm Connie Shaw, Chairman of the Commission, and today I'm pleased to introduce William Holmes, who's going to share some of his memories with us. Bill, you grew up in West Carver, I believe.
Yes, I was born on Cross Street in West Carver on June 1st, 1918. William Russell Holmes was during the First World War, and I had an uncle by the name of Russell Holmes who was in France at the time, and consequently I got my father's first name and my uncle for a middle name. And my mother was born down in Plymouth, down near where the little church is at Clear Pond on Route 44. The little house right almost in back of the church is where my mother was born. My father was born over in West Carver. His father was Gardner Holmes, and he grew up right in the house that's right next to Dr. Rice's right now, the veterinarian in West Carver. And of course, he spent all of his life in West Carver, except a period of time. After he was married, they lived in Plumpton, and then they bought the house on Cross Street. This is the house, and in fact, that's my mother and father standing out front there. And after my father bought it, he added the piazza on, and then in 1932 they squared the house. The section on the left where the end of the cellarway, there was a foundation put in, and a sunroom was added to it, and that stone wall was taken out of there, and then the shed in the right background was eventually turned into a garage, because to the right of the picture, out of the picture, there was a barn that burnt in 1924, and consequently my father built a garage out of that shop there. This house was built during the Civil War, and it was built by a man by the name of Lewis Shaw, who was Carver boy. I remember the other day we were talking about Arthur Shaw, and he was known as Spunk. That was his nickname. We couldn't think of his nickname that day, and his name was Spunk. His nickname was Spunk Shaw. That most all of the boys in that family had, and that's.
Now the Little Red Schoolhouse was
The
near
Little Red
there.
Schoolhouse was up the road about, probably 250, 300 yards. This house is facing south, and to the left, the little Post Point Schoolhouse was up there, and my brother was in one of the last classes there. It was closed in 1924, and my sister and brother both went to that school, but I missed it by 2 years. I went to the E. Tilson Pratt School in North Carver, which is now the VFW post, and I grew up in that situation, and my father altogether probably owned over 100 acres of farmland there and woodland, and he owned a cranberry bog that he bought from Frank Barrows, who just prior to the time my father bought it from Frank Barrows was Carver's last representative of the General Court, and his picture hung in the town hall for quite a while, and since that time we've had several people from Carver run for the General Court, and they weren't lucky enough to be successful. One was Arnie Erickson, and the other one was Frank Mazzelli, who was up until just recently a select man, which I think maybe he will be again. This I believe was on December 23rd, 1943, just before I got home from being surveyed out of the Marine Corps, and it was a memorial, not a memorial, but it was a
Dedication.
dedication to the members the men of Carver that was in the service, and I guess there was some women too. I shouldn't have said just the men, but actually the man in the sailor's uniform and on the near side of that sign is Connie Shaw's late husband, Jack Shaw. The man standing out in front by himself is Jesse Holmes, who was the owner of the building where Nate Roby's hardware store was located. In fact, Jesse Holmes built that building as a box factory, and it ran from 1928 up until about 1954, and then it laid idle for a while, and Nate Roby took over the mortgage on it and made a hardware store. But there's a little bit of a story goes with this. I was writing to a girl in Framingham whose brother was with me in the Pacific, and they lived in Framingham, and this girl I was writing to and their father and mother came down that day to visit and meet my mother and father. Well, and my mother and father happened to be in this picture. Whereabouts in the picture, I don't know. They found the house and everything, but they didn't find my mother and father. And they happened to ride right by this gathering, but they didn't realize that they thought afterwards, well, maybe they should have stopped and inquired about my mother and father. But eventually we met, and the girl that I was writing to eventually became my wife. And Virginia Holmes, her name was Virginia Kendrick. Her brother was with me for quite a lengthy time in the Marine Corps in the Pacific. I met up with him shortly after we came back from Cuba on the winter of 40 and 41, when the 1st Marine Division was formed. I was in the 1st Marine Division at the time, and all of this, where they've got these Afghan prisoners down there, we were the ones that, the 1st Marine Division were the ones that built that, what they called, well, they called it Gitmo, that's the name. This is what the reservation looked like at the turn of the century. A man by the name of Turner, he had quite an extensive farm. Apparently he was quite an affluent man, because there was a number of buildings, and it's located right where headquarters is now.
Excuse me, Bill, this is the Miles Standish State Forest.
Yes, this is the Miles Standish State Forest. I'm sorry,
we call it the reservation.
Yeah, well, we always termed it the reservation.
Right.
In the fire department, it was always called the reservation. But it is the Miles Standish Reservation, but this was the Turner farm, and he had animals and so on and so forth. In 1901, a great forest fire came through there and burned all of them except the house they were living in. It burned all the buildings and went on to the ocean. Of course, in them days, they didn't have the equipment to fight fires with like they do today. So we had a wicked fire in 1957 that also went to the ocean, and it didn't burn this part. It was started on each side of where this is located at the the name of the road begins with J. I can't think of it. And West Line actually was 4 fires started, but this was wiped out. And then later on, it was a fish hatchery. And then I think it was in 1912 when the Commonwealth of Massachusetts bought all of this area, and it consists of about 12,000 acres, and it was named the Miles Standish Forest.
I understand that also it was a bird sanctuary as well at one time.
Yes, I believe it was. I believe it was a bird sanctuary, and I think that might have been after the Commonwealth of Massachusetts bought it. But I think it's the largest state park in Massachusetts now, and we fought many forest fires in there. We had one fire that started in 1938 and burnt to Plymouth, and it killed 2 men. And among there was 3 men there, but it killed 2 of them, and one of them was a Carver man, Bob Andrews, and he managed to escape. That was down in the Plymouth end of the fire, and a devastating. And Nathaniel Shurtleff, who many people knew, he fought that fire. I didn't. I wasn't. I wasn't available that day to work that fire, but I enlisted. Well, this is not Carver High School. This is a Carver Primary School that was operated up until 1924. They had a number of schools in Carver. They had the E. Tilson Pratt in North Carver, and they had the Benjamin Ellis School in South Carver, and they had the Huckleberry Corner School, and they had the Wenham School, which my mother went to, which was in East Carver, and then this central primary school. And the next building is the old Carver Town Hall that was built in 1877, I believe. And the house you can see on the left was the old Shurtleff place, and the one just beyond the town hall was the Atwood place.
Now
And
that's still there.
both of those houses are still there, but that the building in the middle, which was the old Carver Town Hall, was done away with in 1912 when the present town hall was built up across from Shurtleff Park.
Now, people might be interested to know that that street is now Crescent Street here in
Yes,
Santa Carver.
that used to be part of Main Street. It used to come up into the picture and to the left, and went along. And just this side of where the school was, there was the local general store, was run by Henry Shaw, and he sold it in 1924 to a man by the name of Harry Jordan from Plymouth. And Henry Shaw also was a postmaster, and he was retiring, and Harrison Jordan was appointed postmaster, and that was the general store for the center of Carver for some years, and it was the post office up until about 1948, when the little donut shop up on just across from the Baptist Church was built by Mrs. Dempsey, who was appointed postmistress. And that school, that town hall, was used for special students at one time, and it was used by the Boy Scouts for their meetings and the Boys and Girls Club, and it was also used for manual training, who was run by Earl Broadway. And this picture was taken right about the turn of the century. And as you can see, there wasn't a paved road, it was a dirt road. And if you continue straight on this road, you go on to South Meadow Road, which is the present road. But I remember when South Meadow Road was made 3 tracks, the 2 where the wheels rolled and the middle where the horse walked. And of course today it's a heavy traveled road between New Bedford and Plymouth. And I happened to come up that road one night about 12:30, and between the traffic lights down at Plymouth and Route 58, I met 30 cars at that late hour. And so it was quite a, South Meadow's quite a heavily traveled road. Public service announcement. What was,
We're going to have a short break, and we'll be back with our interview.
public service at,
Now, you never want to let these 2 wires touch. And you see that tab there? That means that if this baby blows, boom! You get a free flight around the world. Know what I'm saying, buddy?
Your local library has all the information you need, and some you don't.
I never seen one quite like that before.
We'll continue with our interview with Bill Holmes.
well, I'm one of the few native-born old-timers in Carver. Homer Weston's a few years older. Homer Weston and his family and my family were very close. We grew up in the same area, and of course, Homer's father, Frank Weston. In fact, actually, Homer wasn't born. He wasn't born in Carver, but he was born where Carver is now, because at that time, the Middleborough-Carver line was located just this side of the house, or the north side of the house that he was born in, and it was moved to the south side so that the house included Carver. So Homer was actually born in the town of Middleborough, but the area where he was born was Middleborough then, but it's Carver now, which
That's interesting.
and Homer eventually became fire chief in Carver, and
I think we have a picture of him
yeah,
later
yeah.
on. And
The,
now the first,
oh, this is the Arthur Peterson house. Mrs. Peterson was a distant cousin of mine. Her mother and my father's mother were sisters. They came down from Antigonish, Nova Scotia, and Lucy, she was Lucy Shaw, and Lucy Shaw married Arthur Peterson, and this was Arthur Peterson, Lucy Peterson's home. To the left of it was a barn that burnt in 1940, and this picture was taken right at the turn of the century. There was a whole series of pictures, postcards taken of, I believe there's over 200 of them, that was taken in Carver at the turn of the century, and this is one of them. And this is supposed to have been the first post office. Later on, it was located in the Shirtliff House. The Central Post Office has had about, maybe as many as 10 different locations. And this was also the first telephone office in Carver, which was operated by Mrs. Lucy Peterson. And it's located, it's located on what they call Crescent Street now. And if you enter the Crescent Street, which is a one-way street, and if you enter it on the entrance, this is the first house on the left as you enter Crescent Street, right across from where the general store that was run by Harry Jordan.
I remember that when it was still the telephone.
Yeah, it used to be that relevant to the cranberry growers. Used to be a certain ring that would ring was connected to all of the cranberry growers, telling them what the frost report was going to be. And maybe you remember that, because
Yes,
that was in the old days when you had to turn the crank to notify the operator, and then of course it was party lines when there was probably as many as 8 different families on there, and they always knew that what the local gossip was. The railroads. Now this is the North Carver Railroad Station. I guess there's a lot of people in Carver, the newcomers that have moved into the town, didn't know that at one time Carver had a railroad and they had a railroad station. This line ran from Middleborough to Plymouth, and it was built in 1892. And the first building there is the track walker, where the section gang had their little track walker cart, and then the further building is the North Carver Station. And of course, I being a railroad buff, I had the opportunity to talk with the last station agent, who was Harold Carlton, for about 90 minutes, which I have on tape, and it's very interesting. It takes about 90 minutes to relate the story.
Excuse me, you gave that tape, or I have a copy of it for our history room.
Yeah,
which is we're very grateful to have that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting tape. Harold was living in New Hampshire at the time, and I went to school with 2 of his boys. In fact, some of the school pictures of the E. Nielsen Pratt School, his 2 boys are in it. One was Billy and one was Earl, and some of them will probably remember Billy when Thalia Carmichael was running the gas station where the Dunkin' Donuts shop is, and the gas station now. Billy Carlton worked for Thalia there, pumping gas.
Now that building was renovated and made into a house.
This building is still standing. I have a picture of it. It's now it's now a dwelling, and it's been published in some of the railroad periodicals of one of the few railroad stations, and most of the railroad stations in the country where passenger service was used. Most all of them have been converted into mercantile businesses, but this one happened to be converted into a dwelling. Now this is a picture that shows the freight house on the right. You come down to the freight house on the opposite side of the tracks from the station, and it was kind of an S-curve that came down to the station from High Street, right at the junction of High Street and Plimpton Street. And that freight house, I can remember my father going down to pick up a second set of dishes that dinner service that they had bought from either Sears Roebuck or Montgomery Ward, and the station agent, he had to do the telegraphing, and he in charge of the freight, all the freight that came in, and so on and so. And Henry Pink's store, which I believe might be in there, down to the green, Henry Pink used to have, Henry Pink's father, Stuart Pink, used to have carloads of freight come in of groceries and various things, and it was an active station. And Harold Carlton has told me that on Old Home Day was originally established as the first Wednesday after the last Saturday in July, and it was set up on Wednesday because all the stores in Plymouth and Middleborough closed at noon on Wednesdays. And Harold Carlton has told me that he has seen as many as 75 people get off of the train coming to Old Home Day because the stores were closed in Plymouth and Middleborough, and so they took the railroad down to Carver to enjoy Old Home Day.
That was interesting.
He became station agent in 1917, and the last passenger service was 1929, and the last cranberries was shipped out of there in 1939. Dana Ward was working at the Cranberry Sales Company building, which was near there, and we were discussing this just the other day, that about the last of the cranberries that was shipped out of there. And of course, consequently, the rails are all torn up, and I suppose some of them rails came back to us and as bullets in the Pacific, because a lot of it sold to Japan. This is Homo Western with, this is one of the early nice trucks that the town of Carver bought. It was somewhat, you'd call a combination. It carried, I believe it carried 500 gallons of water. I believe it was a 1957 model, somewhere in that area, and it was built by Maxim in Middleborough, and Homer was a great chief. We, of course, Homer and I grew up together, so I may be a little bit biased toward him because prejudiced, what do you want to call it. In 1950, I built the station where the Eagle gas station is now, and in 1950 they set the radio system up. Prior to that, it was over to Edaville, and the old 1942 fire truck they had was dispatched from there. Whenever the fire call come in, they called over to Ellis Outwards, and then they got a radio, and it was an old, I believe it was before frequency modulation come in back in the old AM days, but then they went on frequency modulation, I believe, and they located the radio at this station, and then that was in 1950, and then when I built my house where I live in, right across from the Eagle gas station, they set a remote up there so that we could operate it 24 hours, and we also had a tank wagon that we kept at my place, which was the old 27, and I kept the old tank wagon there for a number of years. We dispatched the fire department for 23 years for $500 a year. Today, the dispatching budget, I believe, is well over $75,000. My wife and I did it for 23 years for $500. And my wife was quite shy, but Edmund Briggs, who was the fire chief in Duxbury, he was one of the great fire chiefs of Plymouth County, made the statement that that my wife Ginny was the best dispatcher on the Plymouth County fire network. And of course, I lost her 11 years ago, and I live alone now. And I left the fire department 25 years more ago. We have a great fire department in this town. It's a call department, and Dana Harriman's done a great job building this fire department, even though maybe it's cost us an awful lot of money for the equipment and the service we get. But I would say right now, I would match Carver's fire department just about with any permanent fire department in this Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And we're back on Miles Standish Reservation. This picture here, this was a tower that was destroyed in the fire in 1901, and it was an observation tower and a water tower to supply water for his farm. And that was, I think it was located right in the location of where the fire tower is now, because that's the high spot of the area on the reservation.
Well, Bill, I guess we've come to the end of our interview, and I want to thank you so much for joining us. It's been very interesting, and I'm sure that people now know a lot more about their town of Carver than they did before.
Well, I want to say something, Connie. I haven't started yet.
Well, perhaps you'll join us again.
Well,
we hope so.
I'm willing to. I'm willing to, and there's Carver was established in
1790.
Incorporated in 1790, and there's a tremendous amount of history to be revealed that probably a lot of people, well, the majority of the people in town don't know about. And I certainly have enjoyed doing this, and I'd certainly be glad to come back and continue with it.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to contribute a lot more and be of help to people who want to know more about their town.
I could, I could go on for hours about this, as you know it, by visiting me and taping it and so forth. I getting along in years now, and I get a little forgetful, and I can't remember some of the things that did happen. I can remember them, but the dates are vague, and it's like the fire that came through, the old Home Day fire that came through just below here, and down here where Reverend Merritt lived, his house is for sale. There's a cellar hole there. And that fire started over on Purchase Street in East Carver and came across and burnt the barn. It was on Old Home Day, I believe in 1927. And
Bill, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we have to go now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's been my pleasure.